Hey guys, let's make a video about coilovers and about if you can use coilovers with the Tahoverlanding axle swap, and if you've done the coilover conversion on your independent suspension, what does that mean for you? Hey guys, I'm just doing more videos talking about what I hear a lot, and this one's been coming up a lot lately, and that's coilovers. And you all know that, where I'm coming from is going to be from a position of the Tahoverlanding axle swap on GMT 800s. But what I'm discussing here applies to, other things in off-roading. These principles are true for, all parts of off-roading. Just take it for what it is that I'm coming from the position of the Tahoverlanding axle swap, because that's the majority of what we deal with on this channel. And I want to just use the term coilover, and discuss what that even means, because in the Toyota world, they call what they have on like Tacomas and 4Runners coilovers. If you've got like a GMT 900, that's a coilover. You might also note that anywhere you look official, they don't call them coilovers. They usually call them struts. So more like what's on a 1991 Honda Accord, not what's on a Baja 1000 trophy truck, if that makes sense. But in reality, what is a coilover? And I guess it's pretty simple. A coilover is just a shock absorber that has a coil spring mounted to it, right? So why is it we think that what comes stock on a 2012 Chevy pickup like this is the same thing as the 2.5 or 3 inch diameter, 14-inch travel, double bypass remote reservoir shocks on a trophy truck like this? They're not the same thing, but why do people think it is? And I think it's because, there was a time when coilovers were the ideal thing. That was the, almost the unobtainium things that you just couldn't afford, but the really high-end guys had coilovers. And so now I think we're kind of looking at, that's got a coil spring wrapped around a shock. That's the best it can be. But in reality, it's really not. There are benefits of coilovers in general, but basically it is ideal to have the coil spring and the shock as close together as possible. And having them in one unit is a way of accomplishing that. And that's because then the damping effect of the shock absorber can be directly translated with the spring, because the coilover has the spring built onto it, so the shock absorbing and damping is directly translating into the same 2 points as the spring rate, and spring strength and everything's being translated, upper and lower shock mounting points. So there is that benefit, but we're talking like hyperbole here, man. And in reality, what we have here on the Tahoverlanding axle swap, this setup here, is not far removed from a coilover in that sense. In fact, I get stopped on the trail all the time with people that kind of, are those coilovers? I'm like, no, they're not coilovers with a 7-inch spring on them, but okay, whatever. So I want to kind of dispel the thought process that just because it's a spring wrapped around a shock, that it's anything very good at all. Because I can assure you that it's not. But what we do see, and it also is perpetuated because guys that have like the torsion bar trucks, like the GMT 800s, when they swap in coilovers into a GMT 800 and get rid of the torsion bars, it is an improvement in ride quality. And that's less to do with the fact that it's a coilover and just more to do with the fact that it is a coil spring, because torsion bars just suck. So, just think about that for a minute, that coilovers are not all created equal, not even slightly. So now what we're getting pretty regularly is, it seems like a lot of people are just so afraid of cutting off their brackets off of their frame and wanting to try to use whatever factory mounting points on their frame they have to attach like a coilover or a spring. They don't want to buy a Tahoverlanding adjustable coil mount like this. And I get it. You already have it. You kind of don't want to cut it off. But at the same time, there's a reason why, even if you go with a coilover, and you don't even go with my coil mounts, okay, what you need to be thinking about doing is some kind of an adjustably weldable coil mount, or a coilover mount that welds to the frame. Because what you need to be doing is taking your coilover and determining where in the travel of the actual shock you need the upper mounting point of the coilover to be. So if you're gonna do a coilover swap, which I think, you know, people should, if they've got the money, do a coilover swap. What you need to be doing is not finding some coilovers that someone's selling on Craigslist and trying to make those fit on your vehicle. What you need to be doing is you need to be, at the very least, identifying what you need. And so what you'll do is you'll get those coilovers figured out with an axle all the way tucked upward and the coilovers just an inch expanded from fully compressed, and then measure up, and that's where your upper mounting point needs to be for the actual like frame side mount of the coilover. And then what you do is you have to do some pretty serious measurements. So when I ran my shop and I would order coilovers from like King's, for example. King's, I'll tell you right now, I'd pick up the phone. Yeah, I need to order a set of coilovers. Okay, and what they would say is, all right, what's the sprung and unsprung weight of all four corners of the vehicle? I say, well, I don't have that. It's a blank. And they would almost hang up on me. I'm serious. Like they basically like, yeah, well, call me back when you know what you're talking about. And that's because if you don't know the sprung and unsprung weight of all four corners of your vehicle, you can't even select the right coilover anyway. And you certainly can't select the spring length and the spring rate. So if you go and buy a set of used coilovers off of Craigslist or wherever, or some clearance coilovers that already have springs and whatever, the only way that you're going to be able to hopefully even use your factory upper mount is to use an adapter that that goes to a flat plate mounting adapter, and then try to stuff a coilover right there. Well, there's a couple of reasons why that doesn't work. Take a look at the rear. Take a look at where the upper shock mount is on these trucks. It's just a hair back from axle center. And you've seen enough in our videos that when you're doing a Tahoverlanding axle swap, you actually want to move the axle forward 1.5 inches. Well, not only that, is that the lower shock mounting point and the lower coil spring point on the Dodge axle is actually 1 more inch forward of axle center line. Meaning that you're about 3 inches off now from your upper shock mount to your lower shock mount if you're trying to stick to some factory located upper shock mount or something. You're already out of alignment front to back that far. 3 inches at full compression. And at full compression, the distance between that point and the shock bolt is, I'm speculating, I'd have to go measure it, but as I recall, it's right about flush with the top of the frame, so it's right around 9 inches. Okay, so we're talking about 3 inches staggered at 9 inches of height. Okay, that's that far. This is about 9 inches, and that's about 3 inches. So you're not going to have a good alignment of your coilovers if you are really dead set in trying to use a factory existing upper coil mount. And this is true even for the two-wheel drive trucks that already have coil springs. A lot of guys that have the two-wheel drive trucks, they seem really wanting to like, oh, I've already got coil springs, so I'm just going to use those mounts. It's like, yeah, but you're going to be off by inches because those ones are actually basically centered in the upper control arm, which means they're about centered with the axle center line because there's no CV axle that has to go through it. Which means you're still 2.5 inches off at full compression for your coil spring location, and that's at a 9-inch length. We're talking 2.5 inches. You're going to be, look at that. So basically, I'm all for coilovers, but using coilovers as a means of just being afraid to cut off the mounts off your frame is actually going to hurt you because you aren't going to be able to adjust the ride height. If you are set with the frame mounting point, you're only going to be able to adjust the ride height of coilovers by changing the spring length the spring rate, and the spring preload. Those are the only three variables you can change on a coilover. And the whole point of having a coilover is to have a a much better performing shock, right? Well, if you're going to go and start screwing up the way that it's even put together, the way that it's laid out, because you're trying to make it work by modulating length, preload, and spring rate just to get it to work, you're basically wasting all of the benefits of a coilover anyway. So honestly, if you're going to spend the money on coilovers, do it. Go for it. But I think it's important that you realize that you're going to have to make sure that you adjust where the coilovers mount on the frame so that you can actually utilize the benefits of a coilover. And that's even true for the Tahoverlanding axle swap. That's why we use the adjustable mounts. These are adjustable, how high you mount them on the frame, because you have to be able to adjust that. Otherwise, you can't get the travel you need. So it's the same thing. I just want to explain sort of what has to work if you're going to do a coilover, what you need to do. Now, coilovers, if they're a high enough quality and they're built right and they have the right spring rate, the right valving, and they're set up properly, they're amazing. But you need to have ones that are set up for your use, set up for your vehicle, set up for your suspension type, and that's what you've got to do. And if you don't, you're just basically wasting your money, because you're not going to end up with something that rides or performs any better than the Tahoverlanding axle swap with just a simple coil spring and shock. And something I want to talk about is the one that I get probably the most when it comes to coilovers is guys that have basically, they've done the coilover conversion on their GMT 800. They were sick of the way that it rides, and they're like, hey, I'm going to go spend $2,000 to stuff coilovers under my my torsion bar truck. They've already done it. Okay, I've had this no fewer than 10 or 15 times, this conversation recently. They're like, yeah, I've already done the coilover conversion on my truck. Can I use those coilovers when I do the solid axle swap? Let me explain to you why you can't. So in an independent suspension truck, you have a frame rail, you have a wheel pivot point where your ball joints are, okay? Or a tire location. And you have control arms about yay long with a pivot point. Well, there's leverage applied there, okay? As the wheel goes up and down, there's actually leverage applied on the on where it would be a coilover if you've done the coilover conversion. And we call that mechanical advantage. So the spring rate of a coilover on an independent suspension truck needs to be something like, I don't know, double the spring rate of a solid axle truck because of the leverage applied to it. In fact, I was talking to a guy, a customer, he ordered some parts because he's doing a slightly different swap because he doesn't quite have one of these trucks. But he has purchased some aftermarket coilovers that were on a solid axle truck. And he said that he tried to put them on his independent that had a coilover conversion on it. And he said that they were just way too soft. Because as soon as you put, the spring rate for a solid axle, direct kind of linear weight distribution of the spring, as soon as you do that, and you put it into that same spring rate into the mechanical advantage of independent, it just, that leverage squishes the spring. If you've done the coilover conversion, you can't use it because the spring rate is going to be way too stiff. And I'm talking like undrivable stiff. One time, I did a solid axle conversion on a Ford F-250 that had the TTB, the twin traction beam. And it was leaf sprung. They had leaf springs on those in their 3/4 tons. But in that same generation of truck, you could get a Dana 60 straight axle, also leaf sprung. And it all bolted right in. I'm serious, it bolted right in place. The leaf springs are in the right spot. You could do a solid axle conversion in like 2 or 3 hours. Easy. Because you just unbolt that stuff and just bolt the Dana 60 in place of the twin traction beam. Well, there was a problem with that, which was the leaf springs, even for just twin traction beam, which if you've ever looked at a picture of twin traction beam, you have the wheel here and a big long beam that goes up and attaches to the opposing frame rail. Okay, so the driver's side wheel attaches to the passenger frame rail, and then the opposite, the passenger wheel attaches to the driver's side frame rail. So those are big, long links. and the leaf spring is actually out closer to the wheel as well. So the magnification of the spring is way less even in these cases than it would be with like an A-arm setup. Anyway, so we did the swap. We did it in like 2 or 3 hours, just a quick. In fact, it was a guy who worked for me. So like it wasn't like a paying customer, it's just a guy who worked for me. So we did the swap and went and drove the thing. And the thing was damn near undrivable because the springs were just too stiff. It was like there was no suspension at all in the front. It was like it was a solid rod for the front suspension. And you could drive the truck and it drove fine. Then you put a solid axle without that leverage, without that mechanical advantage on those same springs, and we're talking like it would hurt your guts to drive this thing. You'd hit bumps, you'd hit a dip, and it would all but kill you. You know, you needed to wear a kidney belt just to even drive down a smooth road. So I'm telling you, this is a real thing because on an independent suspension, it's not twin traction. I mean, little arms where you have the spring closer to the frame and it's more magnification. So there's one reason why I can't. Well, that same reason leads into the next reason, which is the travel of that coilover. These little itty-bitty coilovers that you use for the coilover conversions on the GMT 800s, they don't have near enough travel. They only have 2 inches of travel, 3 inches of travel, because again, that's magnified out at the wheel. So 2 inches here, you know, magnifies out to 9 inches of travel at the wheel. Not to mention the valving is going to be incorrect because the valving is going to be factoring for that mechanical advantage and everything else. So to answer your questions, if you can use the coilovers from a conversion on the coilover conversion on independent suspension, you can't. I tell everybody, just sell what you got to someone else who wants to do the coilover conversion and start over again. You're not going to be able to make these worth having and work without far more expense and basically, you know, replacing everything, including probably the body of the coilover. So yeah, you can't do that. So you might as well just sell them to someone who wants them and start over again. Thanks for watching.